Hey reader, this is Centaur here, and today we're gonna do hopefully a shorter video because I realized like all my videos have been super long so far. Sorry about that. But hey, we're gonna jump into one that'll hopefully be a bit shorter this time around. We're talking about whether or not the special rule easily catches fire is good to have on your vehicles in Bolt Action third edition and second edition. We're gonna do a mathematical deep dive into both. My answer is the same for both of them, which is that you should basically always have this special rule on all of your vehicles as often as you're allowed to take it, which sounds really bad, right? Because, generally speaking, you don't want to go into war on something that easily catches fire, right? As a general concept, that's not really what you want to do. But it turns out, just because of how bolt action works, that it's actually not so bad. And there's actually quite a bit to gain by doing this. So just to give a quick heads up to everybody before we begin, this is a deep dive video. Okay, we are going to go deep into some math. There's going to be some ratios and equations and stuff like that going on. I'm going to keep all of that off screen, but just suffice it to say, there was a decent bit of math that went into the making of this video. I'm going to try to keep it hopefully relatively clean so you can better understand what's going on. Just suffice it to say, from a mathematical perspective, though, the conclusion is drawn from all of that iterative math. Okay? So to start off with, we should probably clarify which rule we're talking about. There are two flame-related rules in bolt action. The first is the flammable rule. This is the one that vehicles get when they have a flamethrower on board. That effectively just adds a +1 to whatever the result is on the damage chart. That is not the rule that we're talking about today. I would say avoid that rule if you can, but that would mean completely avoiding flamethrower vehicles. I found mixed success with those. And generally speaking, the more expensive you go with those, the less I tend to like them. But regardless, that's not the special rule we're talking about today. We're talking about the special rule easily catches fire. Okay, and this is the one where instead of suffering the one pin that you would get when you get the set on fire result, and then you add the D3 pins for being set on fire, and then you have to make the morale test, you instead add D3 pins in addition to the D3 pins from the result on the damage chart, and then you take your morale test. So it's a 2 D3 pins instead of a D3 plus 1. And I think that rule is the one you absolutely should take. Okay? Listen for the next however many minutes are going to come after this. Poor editor Aaron is going to realize we should have totally cut this part down here at the end, but that's okay. As a bit of background, we want to talk a little bit about what this rule is supposed to represent, because I think this is useful, and then we're going to launch into the math. Okay, quite simply, the tanks in bolt action that involve the easily catches fire special rule, and this is a very small subset of vehicles, are vehicles that instead of using diesel fueled engines, which is most tanks that have been made in human history, they were run on gasoline or petrol or whatever your particular nation calls it. And on the one hand, you can kind of understand why when the M3 Lee and the M4 Sherman, the most common tanks in our system that have the special rule, were designed. You can kind of understand why this was the case. If they're being supported by trucks, jeeps, other vehicles that are going to be running on gasoline, it's quite nice if you can send just one kind of fuel with you to the front, right? Whenever you streamline down resources, it tends to make it so resources can be more readily shared. You can keep more of your vehicles in operation. This complete aside is the reason why half tracks basically stopped existing after World War II, because there was just so much maintenance, so many different parts needing to go on. And by the time the Italians are revolutionizing tire technology so that you can have big, heavy vehicles on tires, it just didn't make a lot of sense to do half tracks. And so, like, we do see this happening in history where people are deciding, hey, let's streamline down the number of parts and the kinds of parts we need so that we can have a more effective military. The attempt at gasoline in a tank was one such innovation, just to see what would happen. Turns out it didn't stick to this day. We pretty much just use diesel in most of these larger armored vehicles. But this rule was designed to reflect the fact that in World War II, you have a mix. Some are using gasoline, some are not. Okay, I know that there's some arguments in World War II circles and bolt action circles about, well, bolt action doesn't get the caliber of this gun right, or the firepower of this gun right, or whatever. And that's fine. I don't know quite as much on the tech specs about certain nations' equipment as other people do. So, hey, if you say so, I believe it. But this one, thankfully, is pretty clear cut. Gasoline, diesel. Gasoline gets the rule, diesel does not. Very simple. So that's what we're talking about today. And in terms of what it practically does for you, in second edition, it was basically a 10-point reduction, right? So if you were easily catches fire, it was 10 points off your cost. In third edition, it's more like 5 points off your cost. And I suspect the reason why is because the game designers found out what I found out when I cracked the math. And they said, this really doesn't matter nearly as much as people think it does. Like in your heads, you feel like, oh man, that sounds really bad. But it's not actually going to have a dramatic impact on the game. And so we're going to take a look at this. We're going to look at, and again, you can cross-check this with references to the M3 Lee, the M4 Sherman, the M3 Grant. These are by far the most common attributes. I think there's maybe one other one somewhere, but I couldn't find it upon research for this. There's just something in my head that tells me there's maybe one more. But suffice it to say, it isn't common. But if you're playing with people, especially people who are new to bolt action, and they've watched Band of Brothers or Fury or something like that, you might see an M4 Sherman. You probably own at least one of these if you've done, a North African army, or if you bought the American US starter set that came out for second edition. Like, you probably own one of these. So I think these are probably more commonly owned, even if they're less commonly fielded by people. And so let's talk about it, okay? Is it worthwhile to save yourself a couple points on a vehicle like this? And the answer is absolutely, because this rule has no real teeth. Full stop. It basically never comes up, okay? So we're going to walk through this in steps to show what the difficulties are, okay? Starting with second edition, step 1, you have to hit the tank in order to trigger the rule. So we started a 3+ shooting difficulty. A lot of shots are going to move into that 4+ because they'll have a pin on them when they take the shot, or they'll have advanced and so they get a move and shoot penalty, or they'll be shooting at long range, right? There's also a decent chance that if you have multiples of these, or if you're factoring cover in at all, you're probably sitting at closer to a 5+. Now, I could go crazy and I could try to work out which of these are more likely to happen at certain times, certain caliber weapons and stuff like that. As I began to realize most of them were coming somewhere between a 4 and a 6, I said, you know what, we're just going to call it at 5. I feel like that might be a little generous at times. But we're going to say your difficulty to hit with a heavy weapon intending to actually do damage to an armored vehicle with the special rule, which are all conveniently damage value 9, we're going to call it a 5+ to hit. Okay? This means that already 33% of all shots coming against you have a chance to trigger the special rule. The other 66% do not. Okay? Step 2. We have to at least glance the tank. And the reason for that is because in second edition, we have 1 damage chart. And if you get a glancing hit, if you just barely glance the armor, you just get a -3 to the result, which means you can't automatically blow up the tank. But on a 6 for the damage roll, you can still get catches fire, which will trigger the special rule. So if you get even just a glancing hit or full damage, it doesn't matter. Your chances of getting the result are the same. You're looking for exactly one number. You're looking for a 6 or you're looking for a 3, okay? This means that when we're looking at the chance to at least glance the tank, a Pen +3 vehicle has about a 16.7% chance of glancing. They have to get a 6 on that damage roll in order to glance. Pen +4 goes up to 33% chance, Pen +5 is a 50% chance, and a Pen +6 is a 67% chance, right? So in general, we've got 33% chance to hit, and then out of those hits, this is the percentage of those that actually glance or do full damage against the tank. That brings our Pen +3s to a 6% chance to both hit and glance the tank, because it can't do anything better than glancing. Okay? This, on its own, should tell you why even light autocannons attacking to the side against a damage value 9 tank are not likely to actually do much damage to it, right? You're really only looking for pins, because your chance of getting both the to-hit roll to work and the glancing roll to work is only a 6% chance. Now, in the case of an autocannon, it's slightly higher because you get 2 chances to hit, right? So your chances of getting that 6 to, for the actual damage roll is slightly higher. But you get the point, right? If you're rolling with a light anti-tank gun at long range, this is what your chances are like. It's not particularly great. If you're dropping a medium mortar on the head of a tank, this is your chance to hit and actually do damage. This is the reason why a lot of these Pen plus 2s that can become Pen plus 3s or Pen plus 4s that become Pen plus 3s at long range, a lot of people are going to say, well, what you're really going for is pins. And they're absolutely right, because 94% of the time, you're rolling for a pin, right? You're trying to add the pins to the enemy instead of actually trying to do damage. The other 6% of the time, you get something extra. It's gravy, right, on top of whatever it is that you're serving up. Pen plus 4 is looking at an 11% chance. Pen plus 5 is a 17% chance, and a Pen plus 6 is a 22% chance. Okay, so now, having finished step 2, we have hit the tank. We have rolled a successful damaging result, so we get to roll on the damage chart. Note, we haven't triggered the special rule yet, because we have to meet one more requirement, which is we have to roll a 3 on a full hit, or 6 on a glancing hit, which is what we just talked about. So for all of these penetration values, by the way, we're not including Pen plus 7 because Pen plus 7 is actually quite rare to see in the game for a lot of reasons. Also, as you'll notice soon, it doesn't actually change the math all that much, going up by an extra +1. And to date, it really hasn't changed the math hardly at all, okay? But at this particular stage, for step 3, the difficulty is exactly the same. You need to get exactly one roll on the dice, so it's a 16.7% chance, right? Technically, obviously, a lot of these results are going to have the ability to, if it's a Pen plus 5 or a Pen plus 6, yeah, they have a 16.7% chance of causing you to catch fire. They have a much higher percent chance of actually just destroying you outright, right? But in this case, it's the exact same requirement, exact same chance to trigger the special rule. So this means that out of all of the shots taken against you, and we'll start with Pen plus 6 just to show you how bad this gets. A Pen plus 6 weapon will trigger this special rule 3.7% of the time. That means if you took 100 shots against your armored vehicle from a heavy anti-tank gun, a medium anti-tank gun firing at the sides, a heavy howitzer or a light anti-tank gun firing at you from the rear, or any other such combination that would result in a final +6, Panzerfaust, Panzerschreck, there's some of those infantry based weapons, a bazooka to the side, things like that. 3% chance the rule is going to come up. And that is not a lot of chance. A Pen plus 5 is sitting on a 2.8% chance, which is an important statistic because this is the 2.77 repeating chance. And that is the same chance as a 1 in 36 chance, which is 6s by 6s. Now, we're familiar with Super 6s, especially in 2nd edition. We're used to the idea of, oh no, now I have to try to hit with a 6 by 6. There's basically nobody in the world who's going to sit down and say, 6 by 6? Oh yeah, I got this. Let me trigger that. Boom. It's not going to happen. Not hardly ever, right? Unless you're rolling an awful lot of attacks. And that's exactly what this statistic tells us. It tells us that, 1 in every 50 times, 1 in every 40 times, it might happen. But wouldn't plan on it. And everything else below that, Pen plus 4 and Pen plus 3, is lower than that. That is an 1.8% chance. That is, 18 times out of, 1,000 that it's going to actually occur. And a Pen plus 3 is 0.9%. That is 9 times out of 1,000. To give you an idea what 9 times out of 1,000 means practically, if you were to play a game of bolt action every single night, 1 night a week, for 2 years, also attending 5 tournaments where you get to play 18 total matches between those 5 tournaments, and you did that every year, that would give you 70 games. And those 70 games would have about 420 to 430 rounds. And if you got shot at in every single one of those rounds, you would see this special rule about once every 4 to 6 months. And remember, you're playing every week and playing a couple games sometimes on a weekend as part of a tournament. That is not a lot of times where this comes up. And more than that, we could look at, okay, we made some assumptions here. We can cross-check our math and see how good it gets. And so I want to do one other thought exercise around this, which is what if we say that your averages of hitting is going to be on a 3 plus? Now, this is weird for second edition because that's your baseline hitting value. That would assume that if we move into range with somebody, we're shooting at point blank range. If we have a pin on us, we are firing at point blank range. Like there's a lot of things we're assuming here. We're always catching these vehicles, not in cover. There's just a lot of things we're making assumptions about. But even if we assume that, 1.9% to 7.4% chance it happens. It is not a very high percent chance. And even if we were to add pen plus 7 to this list, it's still under 10%. So this special rule does not come up all that often. It really doesn't. It is better, don't get me wrong. I mean, only one of these is below the threshold of Super 6s. That is better. But it is not better by all that much. Okay? And when we get into third edition, it doesn't change all that much. In fact, it might even be harder because you're still likely hitting on a 3 to 5, which is the range we've been testing for, and part of the reason why I chose those numbers. Your damage rolls are similar. The penetration values have not dramatically changed on weaponry. We don't see a lot of, sizable or dramatic differences in the damage results. Obviously, getting to point blank range helps, I think, a little bit more in third edition because of the fact it's a +2 to hit now, right? Like, in multiple steps, you're seeing better improvements going on because of that. But then now we have a change to how glancing hits work. It's not just a -3 to whatever the damage roll is on the damage chart. So, we can't just say, oh, well, getting a glance is enough. So it affects the math in other places. And then there's the question of the cover save, right? We've already factored cover into our initial calculations with second edition. With third edition, it might be, yes, you rolled to hit. Yes, you rolled to, for your damage result to see whether or not you actually damage the tank. And then we do have to factor in cover, right? Like, so there's mitigating factors that pop up, and the cover will never be better than 50%. I don't think. I'm pretty sure there's no way to get above 50% on a vehicle because they can't go down. They're not infiltrators, things like that. But still, like, it's still pretty hard, right? 50, if we chop all those numbers in half, which is 50% being removed off the top, like the numbers are going to look pretty bad. Okay. So second edition, third edition, in my opinion, the chance you are even rolling that extra D3 pins is already pretty low. Okay. But now let's talk a little bit about how that works. First of all, if you get a destroyed result on the damage chart, then you still haven't triggered the special rule. If you lose a tank because it got blown up by something really big that was made to destroy tanks, all you lost was a cheaper version of the tank, right? Because you didn't remove the special rule. You're actually in a better spot because you put less eggs in that basket. In addition, the rule is, again, not an auto failure on the morale check. Okay, you add D3 pins. That is true. But remember, D3 does not equal 3. You'll see this sometimes online where they say, oh, we're adding D3 pins. If you suffer 3 pins, this happens. That is true. But you're just as likely to roll a 1, which is what the special rule was supposed to replace, right? Remember this. You're supposed to take 1 and roll D3 and then roll morale. Now we've replaced that 1 with a D3 roll. There's a 1 in 3 chance, which is better than any of the chances we've had so far, that the special rule still doesn't change anything. You're exactly where you would have been if you hadn't replaced the special rule. Sure, you get a few extra pins if you don't, but I'm not entirely sure that actually is going to result in the necessary, oh, you're absolutely going to fail the morale test. First, because M3 Lees, M3 Grants, M4 Shermans tend to be taken regular or veteran. The Lees and the Grants have a little more trouble with this because they often don't have access to a veteran option on account of the fact that they were fielded kind of with pretty new crews as a general rule. But the result is that, I mean, your morale doesn't get too bad. And if you have a morale bubble or a command vehicle nearby, which third edition in particular makes an awful lot more likely, they might actually be okay, right? They're still going to pass their order test. There's probably going to pass the morale test here. They're probably still going to be okay. So the practical impact of adding those pins means you might want to rally a turn earlier, but it's not going to be dramatic, right? And again, you're probably more likely to just blow up instead. So again, special rule wouldn't have even kicked in the first place. So toward that end, I'm gonna go wild and just simply tell you to take the fireball tanks. Okay, they are cheaper. You'll be saving 5 to 10 points per tank. That's not a lot, but you'd be surprised how much more you can fit into your list when you have an extra 5 to 10 points. They are historically accurate. There were periods of time where we put gasoline in American tanks because we tried something new, right? American tank designers, you gotta love those mad lads. They came up with all kinds of crazy ideas, some of which we discovered were not great ideas. Okay. But in this case, it is historically accurate. So in a historically minded game, I have no problem with taking it. It's not gimmicky, it's just real life. Now, looking at my experience, I've run M3 Lees a lot. I've run M4 Shermans a couple times, but I tended to favor the Lee just because one, it's for a long time it's been my favorite tank. I just love this thing. I mean, it's just such a like if a kid sat down and designed a tank, they'd be like, "This is how you do it. This thing is just gonna boom, boom, boom. It's gonna be a battleship on land, which was the original idea, and we're gonna make it look awesome. It's gonna, it's gonna have a cool remote controlled machine gun coming from the top. We're gonna have a big gun at the bottom, another big gun on the top. Like it's just kid stuff, Like this is just brilliant. I love it. And in my experience, they do okay. I've taken this thing to tournaments. We were using the Juggernaut rule, so I took 2 of these as a single tank option in my generic reinforced platoon in second edition, and I got run through the ringer both in practice before that as well as at the actual tournament. At the tournament, I had a Japanese army, so we had howitzers, we had AT guns, we had lunge mine anti-tank teams, which is going to be my YouTube term that I use for those guys. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go look them up in the rulebook, looking at the armies of Japan. You find them. Can't use the actual name on YouTube. That's the rule. We're going to call them lunge mines. Okay, that's my term. But then I had to fight Americans and I had to fight Germans. So I got to fight bazookas, more AT guns because he was going double Sherman, double veteran Sherman at that. So trying to keep me from putting pins on him with stuff. I got to face a Tiger 1. I had a Verbolven, but obviously the Verbolven couldn't really do much to me because they were kind of hoping for side shots, and maneuver warfare isn't really what Verbolvens do against big tanks. There were, Panzerfaust, flamethrowers jumping out of Kubelwagens, right? Like there was, all the stuff, right? Everything was being thrown at him. And having played, I think the full 18 rounds, now I think about it, all of my games went to round 6 and then ended after round 6. In 18 matches, I had 2 immobilized results. One from a lunge mine and one from the Tiger. But we never saw an easily catches fire. And I was getting shot at on at least one of these every single turn, and often more than one of them every single turn. And I made it through 3 matches, almost 20 rounds, with none of these results. No easily catches fire. And I don't think that's weird math. Because looking back on it, in the practice games I did before that, I played a lot of games preparing for that tournament. I played like 11, 12 games with the army that I was planning on using. And so between those like 70 rounds, I got easily catches fire once. I rolled like a 1 and a 2 for pins, passed the roll so they didn't run away. And then the next turn was rallying, obviously, because in second edition, rallying is going to matter a whole lot more than it does in third edition. And so because of that, I'm telling you, it sounds like you're in danger, but you're not actually in actual danger. And obviously, in real life, we don't want to put anybody in real life in real danger, right? We wouldn't want to tell people get in this tank, it easily catches fire. Okay. They didn't actually catch fire all that often. Okay. But it did happen. It was easier, right? It more easily catches fire. Would probably be a more accurate term for that. But in this case, in our war game where we've got plastic dudes that we're putting in platoons to do stuff, you're not putting them in actual danger. This rule is likely not going to actually come up. They're going to be very safe. Okay. And so go for it. Okay. Give it a go. Give it a try. Okay. See what you can do. And hey, maybe I'm completely off. Maybe you have a story where your tank easily caught fire. It really went up in a big thing of smoke and it cost you an objective, or you weren't able to remove a unit before it ran off the board or something like that. Fair enough. You can share those stories down below. That's fine. But on the whole, I'm telling you, if you want to play the odds in a game where 25 to 30% chance means maybe look for another way to do it. I mean, if you're talking under a 10% chance that it's going to screw you over, or even put you in a position where it might screw you over, then I'd say take that bet. It's a good bet. Anyway, I've rambled on long enough about a rule that's super short and easy to read in the book. So if you've enjoyed this content, if you like this sort of insight, then, do the things. You know what to do over here. It's YouTube. You guys have been around the internet long enough. You know what to do. But yeah, tell us how much you appreciate it. Leave your thoughts down below, especially if you have experience with the special rule. It's come up in your game and made a difference. And I will see you next time.